Okay, Nadia, you're on.
Okay, cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our War on Youth fight meeting. Basically, today we're going to go through, what the War on Youth means to us, how we're building our fight against it. I know folks are still tuning in as well, so hopefully we'll, that'll keep building. And so before we could go into it, we will, well, before I say that, we will be giving some background on some of the programs. We've been doing our webinars, and we wanted to make today as interactive as possible. So we'll be hearing from a few students after we give some background, and also we'll get to go into some small groups as well. And no pressure for people to have to talk a lot. It's going to be very much free flowing in that sense. But yeah, and we'll have a larger discussion as well. So welcome everybody. Before we get into it, if Hamid can share some of the just some of the logistical things, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Hamid from Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Welcome to our webinar. This is our 17th webinar. Surprise how just time flies. Here we were back in late March talking about this, and here we are 3 months later. So a couple things. As you all just joined in, your mics were muted, and there's a reason for that. Not trying to police people like this, but because of the Zoom bombing and other types of infiltration that has happened, which happened at our last webinar last Tuesday on the 7th. What we are doing is just kind of holding off on folks' mic and keeping it muted until we start having a collective conversation, or folks go in the breakout room or something like that. I know that our panelists or participants, people who will be sharing the work and everything, their mics are not going to be muted. So that's one piece. So if you need to make a comment, either please type it in the chat room, or just raise your hand, because there's an option to get attention, and we'll open up the mic for comments or whatever. Secondly, as far as the chat is concerned, this is only going to go to the hosts, because you will not be able to send a message to everyone. So, and we can relay that message if you all would like us to do that. We can do that too. Thirdly, the screen sharing, and I hate talking about all these restrictions. Like, here we are, we're trying to keep it as free flow and everything else, but just in the interest of protecting the space and keeping the sanctity of the space. If you need to show something, please let us know, and we'll be happy to put it up on the screen. You can quickly send it to us. And lastly, if you're on the phone and joined in by phone, you can always, and if you don't have access to a computer or send us a message, just text a message, and you can text it to 562-230-4578, 562-230-4578. And this is going to be recorded, because then we post it on our website. The 1 through 16 webinars are already on the website at stoplapdspying.org. So that's basically it, and passing it back on to Nadia. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So welcome again, everybody. If you're joining now, we're doing our meeting on the War on Youth fight. And so Glenda and I will be facilitating the meeting today, and then we'll go into some small groups with some other facilitators. So yeah, hopefully we can make this as interactive as possible. And just, if, again, like Hamid said, if you have any question and when you want to say something during the dialogue, you can just do the raise hand. Because of the Zoom bombing, unfortunately. So yeah, just to get started then, we want to give you a background. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. I think this one, yes. Okay. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Glenda, is my screen showing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started with this. So just want to show this, just a little bit of this PowerPoint for you folks. It's going to go through some of the programs, and like I said, then after some of the background, We'll open it up to any questions. And then we're going to hear from a couple students. And from there, we will go into sharing about the Youth Stalker State, which is a popular education tool we've been building. And hopefully with you all today, we can continue building on that. So let me move these down here. Okay. So basically, here we go. So one thing with the coalition we always talk about is how these programs that criminalize and state violence is really not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. And so we know that with young people, surveilling young people, criminalizing young people, particularly Black and brown youth, queer youth, trans youth, is something that has happened, particularly, you know, we know since colonization and white supremacy here. And so, so with this particular war and youth fight, one of the ways we really go at it is seeing how Black, brown, Muslim, immigrant, and indigenous youth are being targeted as not only as gang members, but also as violent extremists and as threats to national security. What we mean by that is, so we know for the past few decades how young people have been targeted, youth of color have been targeted as gang members. And so now what we see is, you know, these last 10 years, we see a shift on now young people more and more being targeted now as potential terrorists, potential violent extremists. And so, so this shift has been happening and is continuing to happen. And especially right now, what we'll show you is with these programs, these programs are really pushed as non-policing oriented. They're pushed as community-based, which makes them particularly dangerous, especially now that more and more folks are talking about abolition. One of you know, our fears is really then how then in the name of abolition, these programs can then get pushed. See, we don't need the police, okay? We can just fund this and that, but really it is still the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI. And so we'll be getting into that a little bit more. And so, yeah, so we are building power and fighting back. And that's something we always want to remind ourselves what we're doing right now, all of us here together present, sharing knowledge. This is an example of building power and fighting back. So this is just one program which folks are, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with if you're familiar with the coalition, but this is really how the coalition started, was because of the suspicious activity reporting program. So we're in this era of behavioral surveillance. Now, behavioral surveillance is nothing new. When colonization hit these lands, behavior surveillance was happening against Indigenous and Black folks as well, right? And so it's nothing new, but now what we're seeing is through this program, through suspicious activity, the SAR program, it has become actually more legitimized. So that's really the difference. And so, so SAR, which in LAPD is called Special Order 17, LAPD's version of it, is it really helped then to legitimize programs that are based on behavioral surveillance, surveilling people's behaviors. And so, I don't know if these pictures are blocking, but I'll move them. So the SAR definition says, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning associated with terrorism or other criminal activity. Got cut off, I believe. Yes, there it is. And so basically what that says is that, and of course, we would never advocate for reasonable suspicion, right? But this is even more watered down. So what it's saying is that somebody has not actually committed any crime, but they could be thinking about committing a crime. So under SAR, things like taking a photograph in public, asking a business their hours of operation are considered suspicious activities. And we know who this gets targeted against, predominantly Black folks, brown folks, right? Trans folks. So, so really then, this lays the groundwork for some of the programs we're going to talk about. One of these is called Countering Violent Extremism, or CVE. So when you hear us say CVE, it's referring to this program. And this is a Department of Homeland Security, a DHS program. And so CVE basically says that people are on a freeway or a pathway to radicalization. Now, for a lot of us on this meeting, being radical is something we're proud of, we own up to, right? And so, but of course, in the state's eyes, being radical is dangerous. Being radical means you're a threat. You're a possible quote unquote terrorist, violent extremist. And so some of the indicators they've claimed in CVE that could lead to this radicalization are being opposed to US foreign policy, going to the mosque, being too much into your culture. And so CVE, and this is where the danger of the community policing model could come in, CVE provides off-ramps. What they say is, look, you don't even need the police. The DHS will give community groups money and funding to then monitor the people, going through even mental health services as well, to then monitor and report back, hey, who in your community could become a terrorist, a violent extremist, right? And so we can see then how this legitimizes then behavioral surveillance on a one-on-one level and encourages us to police each other. And so in LA is one of 3 cities that has adopted the framework. The other cities are Boston and Minneapolis. And one thing to note, a few years back when the mayor was considering a $430,000 grant to basically boost CVE within the city, it really was sheer people power. It was the young people, it was teachers who really just came out, went to City Hall, organized communities, and the mayor rejected the grant. Of course, while that might have been a victory, we know that was not the end, because part of CVE is actually how the government then changes its names. And so that's one thing we're also really looking out for, is that CVE gets called many different things, right? Based on the city, based on the state. And so this is something we've been monitoring. We're in the process of doing Public Records Act requests as well. So the next one, I believe Glenda is gonna then, talk about, sorry, Glenda, let me go back. There we go. This is the program under CVE, so I'll pass it on to you, Glenda.
All right, hello everyone, my name is Glenda. I'm gonna talk about Preventing Violent Extremism, which is PVE. So PVE is a program that was, sorry, let me rephrase that. So there is a program in the UK, Prevent, and PVE is based off of that. So what PVE is reporting suspicious behavior among the K-12 population of students. So in the UK, if you're a counselor, administrator, or teacher, and you see a student performing one of these indicators, like questioning authority, not doing well in school, expressing anger and frustration in schoolwork, being in poverty, then that student will be reported to the principal, and then reported to the have an open investigation by the FBI.
Do you want to go to the next slide, Glenda, or?
Is it okay if you can talk about PVE, Nadia?
Yeah, no problem, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it. It is based on the program Prevent. And yeah, I think just building a little bit off what you said, it basically gets then teachers to, and even students, it encourages students even to snitch on each other, to tell on each other. And one thing I can even just add is, myself as a teacher, I just think about, these new, Common Core is this new standards, right? New federal standards in the schooling system, which supposedly encourage critical thinking. But then you have these FBI guidelines, which really then go opposite to that. And I'm not promoting Common Core, it's definitely still very neoliberal, but it's just interesting how this operates. And so yeah, I think you covered it, Glenda. Should I go to the next slide? Okay, maybe Glenda.
I think she may have stepped away.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Glenda, let us know when you're back. I know Glenda was going to talk about BIE. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide then. So BIE, this is a designation that's actually already been dropped technically by the FBI. It stands for Black Identity Extremism. And essentially what it said was, and this was leaked, and it was from 2016, and it essentially said that, you know, Black youth are perceiving the violence that's happening to them, meaning they're just thinking it's there. And because they're thinking it's there, this could lead them to be radical, to go against the government, to potentially become a violent extremist. And so, so this is, of course, building on a long legacy of targeting movements for Black autonomy, movements against police violence. And so even though they have dropped the designation, the FBI has still declared Black youth and actually environmental activists, which we know means predominantly indigenous environmental activists. We know with the pipeline movements the last few years have deemed them a higher threat than Al-Qaeda. And so, so we know BIE, while it has technically been dropped, it has not, you know, it really has not gone away. And so this is something okay, I think this was an accident. But this is something that we also particularly now want to look at more, because given the current uprisings, we know that BIE or similar names are now going to be coming back in, particularly knowing how Black youth have been leading these uprisings, right? Whether it's defunding of school police. And so while BIE as a name is gone, we know in practice is not gone. Hey, Glenda, I didn't know where you went, so I started talking about it. Was there anything you want to add? I don't know if you were able to listen. Was there anything you want to add about BIE?
In the next slide, I wanted to talk about the article I found on BIE. So, yes, is it okay if I can share my screen?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Do I have to stop share? Let me see. Let me hit stop share. Okay, there you go. All right, Glenda, you should be able to share now.
All right. Okay. Okay, here we go. So not these t-shirts. So about BIE and no longer having a designation. So Akil actually showed me this article around last year, and it says like the FBI ranks the Black identity extremist bigger threat than Al-Qaeda and white supremacists in these leaked documents. So just looking at this, it says right here, the leaked FBI documents. I don't know if y'all can see my cursor. I'll highlight it right here. So leaked documents indicate Black identity extremists and animal rights activists are among the agency's top counterterrorism priorities under President Donald Trump. So with that, like when we're talking about animal rights activists, they're talking about like environmentalists. Where else in this article? Well, basically to sum it up, like we know they're not talking about like indigenous folks like protecting their land and the like various like environmental racism going on. Basically this article was just showing that Black identity extremism is one of the top priorities under the FBI.
Should I share screen again, Glenda?
Yeah, you can share your screen now.
All right. Oops, where'd it go? Okay, there we go. So this is another piece. So as I mentioned in the beginning, you know, for the last few decades, the gang member narrative has been one of the main narratives to criminalize Black and brown youth. And so now, like I said, the last 10 years, we've seen the transition where youth are still, of course, criminalized in that way, but now this very explicit connection between terrorism, violent extremism. And so, so really then what we see is, so for example, in our research, we found military documents that were either leaked or seen through Public Records Act requests, how talking about, you know, terrorist gang activity in El Salvador, Afghanistan, and so that is that geographic connection, right? There's also programs that have been exposed that trained soldiers here in Los Angeles, particularly in South Central, and actually drove police, police driving around soldiers that are going to be deployed, right, to Iraq, Afghanistan, and basically saying that, look, the war on gangs here is the same thing you all are going to be fighting overseas, the war on terror. So these programs happened, and so then this is another example of this. Another name, which folks who are familiar with the dismantling of predictive policing, and of laser, and so Jeff Brantingham is a professor, right, at UCLA, an anthropology professor, and his research is really, has allowed LAPD to push a lot of their programs. And in one of his presentations, he was shown to actually a photograph of Afghan, quote unquote, insurgents, right, people deemed as terrorists, next to brown youth in East LA, saying that gang members are the domestic terror threat, which can then be compared to the international terror threat. So these are just a few examples of how it's very explicitly and obviously connected. And so we know, right, I feel like this is what I'm sure a lot of us know, right, that using this narrative and label, it ignores the history and context of why gangs even exist, whether they were started by the state or the government or started as community protection, which if folks look into the history of gangs in LA, a lot of the gangs started actually to protect Black and brown neighborhoods from white violence. And then later were infiltrated with drugs and guns. So of course, this narrative ignores that. This narrative also justifies violence against immigrant youth and their families, right? And for us, when we say state violence, it's surveillance, it's arrest, it's physical violence, emotional, psychological, incarceration, deportation, all of these things. And then of course, it views youth, from Latin America as potential violent extremists, terrorists, and threats to national security. And then the community violence that is happening, it only makes it worse. And so these are just some things that we felt that this narrative and label contributes to. And so with all these programs, with these narratives, we wanted to just share some ways that, I forgot one more, the LAPD PATH program. And this is actually a program we are filing some Public Records Act requests to find more information about it. So what it stands for, so LAPD, right, Los Angeles Police Department, and then PATH stands for Providing Alternatives to Hinder, Stop Extremism. And this is something we've been seeing through CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. So we now see it, how it's going to operate through LAPD. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to bring together the mental health unit, the gang unit, and also START. So START is basically with schools called the School Threat Assessment and Response Team. So we can see by bringing these three units together, it essentially says our communities, our communities are more prone to violence, right? And of course, the actual mental health issues that exist this would not provide any alternative. It would only make it worse. And so this is something we're now looking into to find more information about. And of course, we know that it targets young people as well. And yeah, this is just basically, ways we have been fighting back. We've been taking on PVE and CVE now for several years. And so we do knowledge sharing, we research, we find information, we organize with each other, with teachers, including UTLA. So part of what even allowed also the mayor to reject the grant against Countering Violent Extremism was the motion that UTLA, that really us as a community meeting with UTLA, which is the United Teachers of Los Angeles, the union for the LAUSD teachers, and they passed a very strong motion against CVE, against PVE, which definitely also played a key role in the mayor rejecting the grant. So organizing with them, organizing with students, young people, parents, families, and filing Public Records Act requests that are community driven. I realized that I've been kind of throwing that phrase out there, Public Records Act requests, and essentially what those are, so on a national level, there's this thing called FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. And what that says is that the public can legally request information then from the government. Of course, then the state and the government comes back and tries to not give it, and it can definitely be a back and forth process, but nonetheless, it does operate in that way. And so California's version of it is called the Public Records Act request. And a lot of times PRAs tend to be guided a lot kind of top down, so whether it's lawyers or academics, because they can be tricky, but really the reality is that these have been community driven. They have not been led by lawyers, and we've been able to expose a lot through the information we get from Public Records Act request. And so yeah, there's that. There's the workshops. We do different workshops at schools. Well, not with COVID, obviously not, but but that's what we have been doing. Art workshops, workshops on youth safety. So how, like, particularly queer and trans youth can find safety at night, right? Walking the street. Doing college and university student convenings. So as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned UCLA Jeff Brantingham. But really the reality is academia and formal education has always played a role in the violence our communities face, right? And so, so one of the tactics, one of our strategies has been to go after specific universities, specific professors for contributing their research, which then leads to violence our communities face. And so that's been one of our fights as well. Done youth convenings, which we're going to talk about one later, on school surveillance, on digital security. And then, yeah, like I said, the youth art skills sharing workshops. And then in general, just imagining and creating steps towards real safety. We talk a lot about abolishing the police, so we have to start working on that, and we've been working on that. Our ancestors and generations before have been working on that, and so it's really then building on that and continuing to imagine, creating outreach materials, comics, artwork, videos, and then doing community-based reports as well. And yeah, the last piece, taking it to City Hall, exposing the city, the police, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI. So what I'll do now is go ahead and pause. We talked a lot about the programs, we threw a lot of information. So we wanted to open it up now for some questions about these programs before we go on to, we have a student who's going to be doing a presentation around the recent targeting of international students. And so before we go into that, want to open it up. So if anyone has a question or oops, go back.
Can you close the screen share, Nadia, so we can see if people are raising?
Yeah. Stop share.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, if anyone has a question about it or a comment, I know the chat, you can send a private chat to one of the hosts and we can always read it, or if you raise your hand, we can also see that. I do see one comment from somebody that unless you're a right-wing extremist, then they love you, which is actually, that reminds me that one of the ways that now countering violent extremism is being pushed is to go against white extremism. And while, of course, we all know and see that violence, that is actually something we don't want to support them implementing CVE in the name of that, because at the end of the day, we live in a white supremacist country. So the reality is this program is going to end up targeting Black and Brown communities. But yes, the state does love the white violence. Yeah, so that is true. I'm trying to see. I don't see any other comments. So yeah.
There was one question that was raised about what is COINTELPRO. So just real quickly, in case of folks, for the benefit of everybody, COINTELPRO was a counterintelligence program of the FBI from the mid-1950s through early 1970s, which basically was started as a covert operation with the primary targeting of the Puerto Rican liberation movement. And then it went after a whole lot of other liberation movements, Black liberation movements, civil rights movements, American Indian movement, the Young Lords, and a lot of other folks. So a lot of times, intelligence and all of these operations are referred to as COINTELPRO. But one thing just to add to that is that the Red Squads, which were local covert operations in local police departments, preceded FBI before the FBI was even in existence back in the 1880s. So local law enforcement has always been the front line of surveillance and intelligence gathering, and that started in Chicago. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question or a comment about these programs?
The other is someone they want to speak about, make an observation about the role of academia in the CVE industry. So should I just bring him on?
Yeah, go for it. Mm-hmm.
So let me go to Aziz. Aziz, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay.
And go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, sorry, I'm beaming in from Montreal. Yeah, so I work at McGill University here, and I've been involved, I guess, with kind of activism and organising around a lot of this stuff as an anti-racist, kind of anti-imperialist activist for a number of decades. And I do think, you know, it's quite important to think about ways that the kind of what I'd call the sort of de-radicalisation industrial complex gets fed by the kind of normalisation and the spread of all of this kind of de-radicalisation, countering violent extremism stuff. So what I encounter quite a lot is students from different country contexts who are working on and working with profs who essentially have this framework, which is exactly how I think, you know, you described really well, Nadia and Glenda, in the sort of the assumptions there. So you can pretty much sort of put in country X or context X and say, you know, de-radicalisation or radicalisation and countering violent extremism or religious extremism in these different sort of countries. And it just sort of produces this kind of narrative that becomes the way that everybody, and I work in an education faculty where so many people actually speak to this. But on the other hand, I think what's been really important has been the resistance and the organising coming out of, and I'm familiar with the UK context, having grown up there and also, you know, maintained relationships with friends and comrades who are doing work against Prevent and so on. Of also folks who draw on those older histories of anti-racist struggle, anti-imperialist and anti-racist struggle as a sort of a context to understand how it is that anti-Muslim racism, that other forms of racism go back to and track back to these, you know, these histories of colonialism and white supremacy and so on. So, yeah, all that to say, I mean, I think there is this kind of intellectual battleground that's happening in the universities that has real live kind of impacts on, you know, on both activism and also how these kind of nonsense ideas also permeate and get taken up by so many community organisations, and with all the sort of funding politics attached to that too. So yeah, I really appreciate, you know, having a session on this, and I think that there's so many parallels between the stuff that you're describing and the British context and also Canadian, Australian, New Zealand sort of contexts too.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
don't. Yeah, I don't. Does anybody want to respond to that? Any of the hosts or anybody else? I know. Yeah, I know. Definitely thinking of the de-radicalization on college campuses. Yeah, I just sort of just seeing how that has impacted. So yeah, I really hear you on that. Thank you for sharing.
Celine, did you want to unmute? Oh, Akhil, go ahead.
I think that one thing that's really interesting, really quickly to respond to Aziz, is that sometimes they exchange, I think it might be annual, but I think Hamid might know more. They exchange these tactics actually with those very countries, this so-called Five Eyes countries, which are really all Anglophone, meaning English-speaking settler colonial countries, and England, which is the sort of pioneer of these policing tactics, first with its colonialism in Ireland and then the rest of the world. And so countering violent extremism is really, and all of these tactics, it's really a colonial strategy for how to best subdue resistance, or how they conceive of subduing resistance. So radicalization is just revolting against a colonial system. So LAPD is one of those partners, and they attend those trainings. Very accurate analysis.
Hey, Hamid, sorry, I just joined and was just able to get my audio working. What was the question?
Oh, I thought you wanted to make a comment on Aziz was lifting the role of the academy in countering violent extremism and these programs around radicalization, and they were speaking about their experiences growing up in England and then now teaching in Canada. So how the academy is very deeply complicit in these kind of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if this, and I apologize if this has been covered already, but I think like even beyond like the grants, the new cycle of grants that's been released, like the National Institute of Justice and DHS that's been funding university grants, the DHS Center for Excellence that's specifically been working with other universities to produce research. It's like, you know, it's even beyond the grants. It's just like, how can they solidify CVE as a framework? Like that kind of logic as a framework. And then I also wanted to flag too that like, or to just mention that, and I was just revisiting the UCLA CVE program, like the USC CVE program, and like the different CVE programs that are being pushed through universities and how they've been updated in the past couple months. And they're really looking at building multidisciplinary teams and just finding out ways to rebrand CVE and make it something that seems appealing, or seems like trying to make it so that they can more easily partner with community institutions, or kind of use that like manipulative language of building resilience and whatever. But so they're trying to figure out ways to rebrand that and build multidisciplinary teams so that in addition to having academics develop research to legitimize CVE frameworks and to keep producing research that legitimizes the DHS grants, it's also around like building multidisciplinary teams with like the school counselors, like educators, like campus police, and different kinds of staff on campus and different departments, to make sure that they're able to gather resources on and like information on students, and how create an information sharing environment. So I noticed that a lot of the grants are actually really focused on the multidisciplinary teams, and I think that's like that might be part of the rebranding, because I think it's been more evident that it's moving in that direction than it was like years ago.
And Nadia, there's one more question here that you mentioned working with UTLA, but I was wondering the extent to which LAUSD teachers, from your perspective, have been complicit in the war on youth and these CVE initiatives.
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers have been very complicit with it. You know, it's as I had stated earlier, you know, formal education has been an arm of state violence, right? We know that cultural erasure and criminalizing students has happened also because of the school system. And so, yeah, even just thinking of teachers I experienced, and even right now, you know, thinking of my students coming to me and telling me about certain teachers and how they've treated them, thinking of the fact that, you know, at my school, even though our student population is only 10% Black, that the majority of the students who get pushed out are Black. And so, so yes, I think a lot of teachers are very complicit in it. And, you know, and so just whether it's through the curriculum, through what they're teaching, through the disciplinary actions, which students do they give more chances to, which students are they more likely to kick out? When a student speaks up and, you know, maybe says, oh, like, this is terrible, I don't agree with this. We know the statistics and the numbers show that Black and brown students will get reprimanded more. So yeah, so I think a lot of teachers have been complicit with it. On the flip side, there are teachers who, because of understanding this history and the inherent racism and anti-Blackness within the school system, there are teachers who are pushing against this. And this is where I think then some of the UTLA, and of course, I'm sure not every teacher who's part of the union would support it, but the reality is that motion did get passed, and it is because of students and teachers and families who do not want to be complicit. So yeah, that's what I would have to say about it. And so unfortunately then, as these programs start rolling out more and as these guidelines start being shared more, teachers are going to be the racist teachers, which is a lot of them, are going to be then empowered by it. But a lot of us are fighting back too. So yeah, and I don't know, feel free, anybody else, if they want to add to that.
Cool, they said thank you.
Yeah, cool. So if, I don't know, I don't see any other comments. Do you see any, Hamid, any raised hands or anything? Okay. Well, I think this is actually a good transition time. And of course, we are going to go back to an opportunity and open it up for more conversation in a few minutes. So feel free to always bring back questions or comments. But going to actually transition on to Sarah, who is going to talk about the programs and how the state has been targeting international students. So go for it, Sarah. It's all you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to hear from you all, and definitely helped greatly in the expansion of my understanding of the ways that CVE programs are particularly targeting Black and brown youth. I didn't know it was that extensive, but honestly, it doesn't surprise me. So thanks for that information. It was really helpful. And I'm by no means a legal expert. I'm a university student at the University of Hawaii, and I'm sure we've all seen the recent ICE ruling, and then today, again, another newly issued ruling kind of rescinding sort of everything that had been previously stated. So while that is a win that should be celebrated, and that definitely came at the hands of immigrant rights and immigrant justice organizers that were organizing tirelessly to ensure that these rights were protected for international students, we need to be cautiously optimistic, because even with the previous statement being rescinded, there's still a lot of predatory and surveilling tactics that universities use towards international immigrant and undocumented students. So just a couple of things to highlight. I don't have any materials to share just because everything I would have been speaking about has already been taken back, so it's not necessarily relevant.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. Would you mind going back, because some folks may not know what that ruling was, so that got rescinded? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Sorry, I should probably explain that. So there was an ICE ruling issued about a week and a half ago, stating that international students would have to go to in-person classes at their respective university, or face deportation. So basically the message that it was sending was that international students wouldn't be able to do online classes during the pandemic, and that if an international student was to be found living in the United States and attending their university, but taking a majority of online classes, or for instance, maybe not passing one class, that they were then considered to be non-compliant with ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement policy and the basically like agreement of their visa, and they would be vulnerable to deportation. So really quick, bunch of people mobilized and organized. Absolutely, it was important that there were big lawsuits from, you know, big universities like Harvard and MIT, but we can't let that overshadow the fact that it was grassroots on the ground work that led even up to those filings, procedural filings. So what we're doing, the coalition at the University of Hawaii system-wide right now, is we originally started organizing with the intention of helping to push for and create some sort of immediate emergency solution for international immigrant and undocumented students, since the ruling that said that none of that was actually going to happen that I just previously stated was removed earlier today. And even before that, we were organizing under the coalition name of Shave ICE, because we want to declare the University of Hawaii system as the first sanctuary system, which would mean that all 8 campuses would be declared sanctuary systems. So I can put in the chat, or maybe I'll just send it to someone, because I don't know if I can message everyone. We created a petition that clearly outlines our stance. We want the University of Hawaii to declare themselves as a sanctuary campus. We want them to not share personal information with Immigration's Custom Enforcement, no longer host trainings or provide shelter for any Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees. We have a couple of hostel style buildings that are sometimes opened up during conferences that could potentially host someone from ICE, and we demand that our campus be ICE free. In Hawaii, there's a couple of maybe niche ways that we were impacted by this ruling and continue to be impacted by the predatory and surveilling tactics of ICE. So for instance, there are many COFA migrants. COFA is a Compact of Free Association. It's not a treaty, but it's basically an agreement between the US and 3 Pacific Island sovereign states, the Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. And we have a lot of COFA migrants that migrate to Hawaii because it's closer than the continental United States. They migrate for many different reasons, healthcare, but many come for education. And so the COFA students weren't necessarily impacted by the ruling because they don't have visas, so they don't have to file I-20s, but it would impact. I spoke to someone from the Marshallese consulate, and they did let me know that it would impact COFA migrants that were looking to work for the university, not in a GA-ship capacity, but perhaps in like an office or a food service job. They would be impacted because they wouldn't be able to file their I-20. And they also wouldn't be able to work likely in person because many of our university functions have been shut down. We also have concerns about First Nations students from Canada, because it's unclear whether or not they are covered by the J Treaty, which is the treaty that they have with the Canadian government, which allows for their visas to be issued. So as we can see, I mean, it's impacting primarily those 2 populations already are Indigenous students that would be heavily impacted, if not by the visa ruling, but in so much as they would not be able to work potentially, which we know obviously has huge implications for their ability to learn and just live and have income. A couple things that are important to note is that international students are not necessarily protected by FERPA, which is the Family Education, I don't even remember what FERPA stands for exactly, but it basically protects your information from university or public institutions. So CVIS is this internet system that tracks and monitors international students that are in the certified CVIP schools, and it's the technology that DHS uses to share the data with the Department of State's embassies overseas, and it's basically like the hub of all international students' information. And if a student were to, for instance, move, right, they maybe move to a different apartment building, a different home. If they were to move to a different state or a different part in Hawaii, if they move to a different island, for instance, they would need to report any of those changes. They need to re-report major full-time study or part-time study student address and telephone number, and they would have to report all those changes, which would mean that ICE would easily be able to track down students. So that's why one of our demands is to mandate that the university doesn't share information, CVIS information with ICE, because that places international students at a particular vulnerability. A couple of other things that pertain to the recent ruling, right, is that I think, especially with the quickness and the very kind of unstable nature in which international students were kind of placed with all these rulings being issued and all this fear and anxiety that was kind of drawn up, it illustrates now more than ever that we direly need sanctuary campuses and sanctuary systems, because international students, immigrants, undocumented students don't deserve simply incremental changes just to act as a Band-Aid quick fix. In the event of mass deportation, they deserve to be ensured by their university the protection of their safety. International students, immigrants, and undocumented students deserve to learn and work and live just like the rest of us, right? And they shouldn't have to worry while they're studying. They shouldn't have to worry about deportation. They shouldn't have to worry about their compliance with predatory ICE policies that we know have changed so drastically over the past couple of years. And they deserve to know that their university and administration support them, and that they won't be targeted in any future ICE attacks. So that's kind of the gist of what we're working on. I can share materials with you. I would recommend, if you want to keep up with what's happening at the University of Hawaii, follow ALU Hawaii, which is ALUHAWAII. It is the graduate student union that has largely been leading the coalition for Shape ICE. Most updates are posted there on the Instagram and Twitter. You can also check out their website. We've posted the link to the petition, which would be greatly appreciated if you signed. And we're also going to be attending our Board of Regents meeting tomorrow. So if you know anyone that attends the University of Hawaii that's not plugged in, I don't know if anyone does, but let them know, and hopefully they can get plugged in and be able to attend the meeting so that we can demonstrate the overwhelming support that we have for our international, immigrant, and undocumented student community. Thanks so much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Nice. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really, really appreciate the knowledge you were sharing with us and for being here. So yeah, does anybody, hosts or folks participating, anybody have any questions or comments for Sarah? I don't see any on my end.
I am doing a quick scan to see if folks have any questions. No. Sarah, one question I do have is, there's one of the indications, and this is more, given the most recent records of the Trump administration around the Muslim ban and other things around migration that has been going on. And the thought was that, is this going to be leading towards curtailing student migration, from the 25 or 27 countries that have been impacted as a result of that. So do you see, are there conversations around there, and are there other international student organizations that are engaged in the organizing and advocacy around this issue?
Yeah, so in Hawaii, there was a couple coalitions that worked on this issue primarily in 2016 when it became emergent. As of recently, it hasn't been as much of a part of the conversation as I think it needs to be. A lot of people forget that, you know, even though we are a small archipelago and chain of islands, it is the hub between the Pacific and the continental United States. So there is actually a ton of migration, a ton of international students, migrants, and undocumented folks that especially are studying at the University of Hawaii. It's a Research One institution. We see a lot of people coming to study for engineering, physics. It's very popular in those areas, and a lot of those students happen to be Egyptian, Algerian, some of them are Syrian, a lot of them are Iraqi. So, and I know them personally, and it definitely needs to be more a part of the conversation. The University of Hawaii system also likes to tout themselves as a liberal-leaning administration, but we know that our president, David Lasner, is basically just a modern-day Captain Cook. I don't know if people have been following what's happening with the 30-meter telescope, which the University of Hawaii basically strongholds to be built on Mauna Kea, which is the most sacred place in Hawaii to Hawaiians. And last year, actually, this is the anniversary of the most recent stand on the Mauna, where over 30 elders were arrested for blocking the road. Militarized police were brought in. So historically, our university does not have a great record with treating Indigenous people, Black and Brown folks well. It was the university itself was actually created, and one of the I don't want to say inaugural because it's not something to be honored, but one of the primary institutions that helped to create Agent Orange. So it has a very deep and dark history tied to the military-industrial complex, which we know disproportionately impacts Muslims and those in South Asia and West Asia, North Africa. So I think that should be a part of the conversation more. And if you all have any advice as to how we can incorporate this lens more into our organizing and into our efforts, we would very much so welcome that, and would obviously extend like our support and in communicating with you in any way that you would find necessary to help strengthen our lens and our take on this issue.
Thank you.
Nice. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, I don't see any. Yeah, thank you again, Sarah. Really appreciate you. So we'll go ahead. We will we'll transition into, well, I'm wondering to Celine, not to put you too much on the spot, but I guess I am. I was wondering if maybe kind of related to what Sarah's talking about in general, maybe if you could talk about, you know, some of the impact of the Palestinian youth within the U.S., obviously, you know, related to what Sarah's talking about, whether born here or migrating from Palestine. Just any thoughts around that connected to what we were just talking about?
Yeah, I guess it's similar. I mean, I don't have too much to add in terms of like the kind of experience and fear that people were feeling, and like scrambling to figure out like resources and what to do. I think it's good to hear from you also like about like continuing efforts, and like I think one of the things now that like so we have with the Palestinian Youth Movement, we have the Student Empowerment Committee that's been doing like support for students around political education and analysis, organizing support, and also like support with like dealing with repression and like Zionist backlash, but also things like this. So we were just trying to like get in contact with as many students as we could to like share whatever resources there were. But I think like one thing we were seeing now, like I just got a call today from folks who are mobilizing against the administration's decision, the ICE plan to deport international students. Those folks who were mobilizing around that reached out to me and said that like the new president of the UC system has like this horrible track record, and so one thing they want to follow up on doing right now is like continuing some of the energy and building that momentum to go after him, because a lot of his policies really hurt undocumented students, immigrant youth in schools, Palestinian Arab youth, Muslim students. It's on like Black students on campus. Like there were just so many things in his track record that made organizing so difficult in the UC. And so now I think like what folks want to do is try to go after him and try to figure out some plan of action around him to take him on. But yeah, I don't have too much to add. Just thinking about like just ways people want to like continue mobilizing and organizing in this moment. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, Nadia. It's
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think, and just to also like, yeah, Palestinian Youth Movement, PYM, has been our core partner in the fight against CV and PVE, and so yeah, I just wanted to also then connect that to this. So yeah, that's good, Celine. So we're just going to transition now and do basically just kind of open it up again to some dialogue. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen again. So let me just open this back up. So what we wanted to just maybe spend maybe about 10 minutes, 15 minutes talking about as a group. And after that, we're then going to hear again from Glenda and also one of the high school students that was working with us last summer, Ananda. They're going to be talking about the popular education material we've been building, the Youth Stalker State. But to help us transition into that, we wanted to basically look at these couple of questions, and feel free to, whichever question speaks to you, basically, what you see here. So this is again a shout out to Students Deserve, the students and families who were fighting to defund LAUSD school police. They've been able to do not even just here in LAUSD, but Oakland and several other school districts as well. And so the reason we wanted to bring this up today is because as we talked about with CVE in particular, one of the things that makes it especially dangerous is the fact that it's promoted as something not related to policing, right? The grants go to organizations, even community-based groups, right? To mental folks, agencies and organizations, helping with mental health in our communities. So right now, one thing a lot of us have been talking about and are really concerned about is as abolition is becoming a little more in the mainstream, right? Abolition, getting rid of the police. Now what's unfortunately starting to be pushed more and more is this concept of community policing. And so one thing we've been talking about is, okay, so we defund, we take away money from the school police, which is huge, which is amazing, which is really a step in that direction, right, of getting rid of police. So now then, where would this money then be going to? So one of the things with preventing violent extremism is counselors and teachers and other school staff have to participate in it, right? So even myself as a teacher, if, for example, if they were to make it mandatory reporting, which they've made it in England, what does that mean then, right? To then for us as teachers or counselors to have to report these things. So while our schools need counselors, while our schools need teachers, how then can we make sure this money doesn't go into policing our students, right? Even if it's not the police, but then how do we, how does that fight continue? And I imagine Students Deserve and folks are having these conversations, and that's something we wanted to bring today. And so these are just a couple of questions we wanted to look at. I don't know if they're being blocked. Can somebody let me know, are the questions blocked by my windows, or can folks see the questions? If any of the hosts can unmute and let me know.
They're coming through fine.
All the questions? Okay, great. Because on my screen, the Zoom stuff is kind of blocking it.
Right, no,
Okay,
they're coming through fine on the screen.
Okay, so the first question is, and again, folks feel free to talk about any of these, but some questions we wanted to put for discussion were, how do these programs relate to recent fights to defund school police? So that's one. Where will these funds be redirected to? How can we build power to make sure they aren't redirected to programs that force or encourage other school staff to police and criminalize students? And how can the fight for defunding school police be a part of actually abolishing, getting rid of the police? So yeah, these are just some questions. I'll keep these up there. I'm trying to see if I can somehow view the chat too, but I can't. Okay. Let me see if I can make this smaller. So yeah, these are the questions just wanted to put out to folks to see what your thoughts are on this, given the current fight to getting rid of school police. And hosts, anybody's welcome to participate in this. I'm going to actually just make this go out so I can be able to see my chat. Here we go. Okay. Okay, I don't see anything on my chat.
People being shy.
Maybe some of the hosts can share what they think, or folks can type their answers too.
Well, I can throw something, I guess, sorry, not to take too much space. I think you spoke about the PATH program that the LAPD has been, and I'd love to hear more from Akila on that as well, where they have been very much, pulling in various types of resources into schools. And I think I'm interested to know that how is this new sort of policing over the last 20 or 15 or 20 years, as we are shifting into risk assessment tools and predictive algorithms and analytics, how do you see that entering into, or it is already there, into the academy, into the high school systems or school systems, to criminalize students? And by criminalizing, I'm not speaking about just only as it relates to law enforcement and policing, but to just constantly trace and track and impact students' futures and their lives through the risk assessments and all of these tools. Do you all see that happening at all?
I'd love for maybe if any, Celine, sorry. I see you trying to, there we go.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say, like, also, like, in response to the first question, like, how these programs relate, like the fear of things moving into the direction of like implementing CVE and calling that like, a solution, since it's not as explicit, and how these policing frameworks and these new analytics, like the predictive analytics, are moving into the schools. And I've seen the effects of that, like even from a while back, like when I was a student at UCI, being approached specifically for language that I used that wasn't anything serious, but just like, oh, well, what might that lead to? And then like punishing me and sending me to like student conduct hearings from the get-go, So like things like that, even the way they started looking at, in the beginning when I first came in as a student, even there was a shift, because at first it was like the students who are doing like anti-Zionist work on campus were being punished following actions, and not for language used before we even do something. So that was like a flag, even just talking to like my siblings or family friends or folks I know through my organization who are high school youth, and just learning about like the new ways that like, or different ways that like teachers are like asking them certain questions or finding certain things suspicious that's like kind of strange, and just to, and I'm just thinking about how like it's so insidious, because like the way CVE works is that they partner with institutions that already have relationships with community, and like schools, like like a nonprofit that might offer certain services, for example, or something like that. They leverage those relationships because there's already a trust there, or there's already like a service that's being provided that a majority of our community members utilize. So it's just so insidious it's so important for us to know, like, when these things are being pushed, because it's going to be pushed in places that we're attending regularly, our schools, our religious spaces, like community institutions, whatever. Like, this is an explicit goal of seeing, like, how can we make it clear that that this policing isn't only happening through the police department, but they're also pushing these through institutions that we already have relationships with, again, like our schools, and how can we make sure that we're preempting that and, like, know how to fight it and know when to identify it, know how to identify it, and know know it when we see it, so that we can organize. But those are just some thoughts I'm having. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
Folks have any other thoughts? Oops. It's cool if not. They might, as they come, feel free to share, put them in the chat. And even if we weren't able to, folks weren't able to express a lot about this, I think, these are things that I know folks are thinking about and we should continue thinking about. I know it's something, just like I was saying earlier, thinking of how schools staff treat students, right? Even just with what you were saying, Celine. And so thinking of how then that happens on the K through 12 level is something, that does really concern me then, in terms of how these programs then really bolster teachers and counselors to be policing students.
Nadia, I have a comment from Carly. So Carly, if you go ahead and unmute yourself. Sorry, I didn't see your, so please go.
Okay, I got it now. Thank you. I really think the second question is very, I would also like to know how that can happen, and just, like, make sure that if we demilitarize and defund the police within schools or within cities, like, to make sure that doesn't happen again. But that's, anyway, I was more talking about, I wanted to talk about the third question. How can the fight for defunding school police be a part of actually abolishing, getting rid of the police? And I was typing to Hamid that once you defund police in one area, I think it can create a domino effect, maybe also to other cities, or whether, it's hospitals that have police that want to get rid of police, or schools. And I'm just hoping, like what we saw with Minneapolis, and I know there's another city in New Jersey, I forget what it's called, that doesn't have police, that has more of a community response to emergencies. And I think that now people are seeing, like, oh, this is something that can really happen. Like, we really can abolish the police, we can defund them, and we can put in emergency response professionals instead of these white supremacist killers and harassers and assaulters. Every week some brown or black person is dying, and they just need to be get rid of. And I'm just really excited that you guys are doing these webinars, so thank you guys. And I really am hopeful for the future. But yeah, in response to the last question, I think it can be a domino effect, and I'm hoping for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's really like, and that's what building power is all about, right? How do movements in one neighborhood or one city then really get that fire going? So yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any comments? I'll check my chat too. I don't see anything. Do you see anything on your end, Hamid?
No, there was this one question that we didn't get a chance to answer, which was from a previous conversation. So if you all want to address that now, and that was about the CVE programs and PVE, and the program was that, are these programs supported by Democrats and Republicans?
Yes, they are supported by both. And actually, CVE was started under a Democrat administration. So so yes, Democrats are very much, and if anything, sometimes Democrats are more even in favor because it gets pushed as, you know, as more quote unquote community based. So yeah, the short answer is yes, they are. And I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, any of the hosts or.
Hi, everyone. Magali here. Yeah, thanks for everyone that's shared. I'm just also thinking about how the fight to defund school police that's being led by Black students is also just contributing to the narrative of making police irrelevant in our schools and in our communities. And I'm also thinking about kind of what Nadia and other folks mentioned earlier about CVE, PVE, and the connections to the continuous harm that DOJ and Department of Homeland Security as a whole continue to recreate. So I think just I'm just thinking about the questions about like the programs to abolish the police and also the funds and connecting it to like the larger pictures as like folks have mentioned. I think has also been something that that has continued to be in my mind, and in connection to also international students who are also being targeted by ICE, and as a whole, how these larger departments continue to create harm.
And then there is a also comment, if there's an opportunity down the line, I'd like to say a bit more about the normalization of surveillance. And this relates to foreign students, Nadia, through CVIS and SCV certification, and its ties to the discourse of national security. So do you want to address that now or after Ananda's piece? Or
Can you repeat the question?
It's about the foreign students pieces, that if there's an opportunity, they'd like to say a bit more about the normalization of surveillance through the programs that monitor foreign students and their certification and their ties to national security.
Yeah, we can go, yeah, if they want to, then we can then go into the other piece. That's fine, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I am going to go to, I think it's Manisha. Manisha, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for these weekly webinars. They've really been a lifeline for me. I am in Honolulu, and have worked with Stop LAPD Coalition and supported the work when I've been able to be in LA. So these webinars have been really great. And I was really happy that one of our student organizers, Sarah, who's now based in Southern California, could join this conversation. So I sent a link to the CVIS program to Hamid. And if you look at the description of both the sort of the exchange program itself and sort of the data collection tool that comes with that program, the certification of schools and colleges, and this applies to also K through 12, which may have international students, you will see that it really bears out what Nadia was saying about normalizing surveillance, right? Because CVIS is very clearly a tracking and monitoring tool, and it collects, students' residential information along with, whether they are making progress, and the progress is defined by ICE in their program toward graduation, right? So it's a really, I think, regardless of whether regardless of the rules revocation today, I think it was a really good opportunity for us to have a discussion amongst ourselves about these sorts of tracking and monitoring mechanisms and how universities and schools are complicit in it, because our university's response wasn't that, nobody's immigration status should, determine whether they feel safe or not to go back to in-person, instruction. It was more like, hey, we'll do something for you so that you can be compliant with the rules. And this was, an analysis that came out from the students themselves. They felt like there was a fundamental injustice in the ways in which immigration status became tied to people's feeling of well-being or safety, and also their concerns about the communities around them. So yeah, I just sort of feel that this is a moment to really connect those dots between police, these other surveillance mechanisms, and the service system. The data is inputted by our international student offices, so it just bears out everything that you've been saying about how the people who run the university, who are supposed to be our mentors and protectors, like they're the ones who are sort of supplying these this kind of information. And we also heard our university very glibly say, oh, FERPA protects you, so no worries. But we know how ICE operates, and we know that ICE goes door to door, and we know that ICE arrest people when they are out in their in their driveway or something, or in the streets, so just in their neighborhood. So that wasn't at all reassuring, and I hope that we can really build on this moment to raise some awareness about this large apparatus of surveillance. And I want to thank you folks for giving me the language to think about it like this. So thanks so much for letting me say my piece.
Thank you, Manisha.
Thank you, Manisha. So I know before we move forward, you said there was one more person.
Yes,
yeah.
there's a comment from Michael who wants to speak about, real quickly, make a comment about the pacification of universities, specifically here in LA at Cal State LA. So I am going to, let's see, where did Michael go? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Michael, unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for sharing the resources and your own experiences. I just wanted to speak to the pacification of the universities, as we spoke about earlier. Yesterday, I attended a rally on behalf of Dr. Melina Abdullah, currently the President Covino of Cal State Los Angeles is trying to make sure that she does not serve as the inaugural dean of the College of Ethnic Studies. It's a college that was largely her brainchild. She's uniquely positioned to teach and lead that college, and as she called it, the intellectual arm of the revolution. And so basically they've taken her emotional labor and they've created a department around it and are, for whatever reason, unwilling to allow her to lead it. So I just wanted to say that, it's something that is impacting us tangibly here. And if you wanted to reach out to the president, Covino, and let him know that she's uniquely qualified, it's an action that we were all taking yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Absolutely, very much, yes. And thank you for reminding us all and aware of that. And Melina has been an awesome partner and ally, and definitely worked quite a bit together. But I think the work that she's done, both for the university and really kind of providing that pathway for students to work with the community-based groups as well. So much appreciate your comments. Thank you. Okay, that was it, Nadia.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Michael and Monisha as well. So we're going to go ahead and transition now to back to Glenda, and Glenda and Ananda are going to be talking about the youth stalker state. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, Glenda, it's all you.
Okay, so last April we had a workshop, and it was on school surveillance and digital security training. And the workshop was just a bunch of high schoolers. We had a lot of activities. One of the activities we did was a suspicious game, and that's where we did we cut a piece of paper into fours, and we answered the question, and it was all anonymous, and we crumpled up the paper and threw it in. It was a really fun activity. So we did that, and just to get our minds flowing of what suspicion could look like in terms of the state. So we thought about, making a youth stalker state. So the youth stalker state's based on the Stop LAP stalker state, like the information sharing environment. So we've been trying to brainstorm that and put it all together and make different sectors on what the youth stalker state can look like for students and youth in the K through 12 population and even in college. So just like some sectors, so like administration or like public transportation, teachers, counselors, and other staff members, like student government, what else? State testing, stuff like that. So, like as you can see right here, like these different sectors, like so if you look at these sectors and put like administration, teachers into those different sectors and what that could look like. So like here is just some of us brainstorming ideas. Like right here, out of school, what out of school can look like, places, education, interest. So yeah, this was what some of the high schoolers did last year. Just some more examples. And I wanted to invite Ananda to speak. He was one of the high school interns last summer too. So.
Let me unmute Ananda. Let me.
A video. A video? Okay.
Oh, hey, Ananda. Oh, good to see you guys. Hey.
All right.
Go for it. Welcome, Ananda. And Ananda's mom. Good to see you as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Ananda said his communication device is not working, so it's okay if I read something that he wrote in advance. Thank you.
That would be great.
Ananda, you concurred that you did participate in a Venn diagram, using it to reflect on what groups are contributing to surveillance and prejudice. We listed different groups in our society, including the police department, school system, and others. And then you also show how these groups relate to each other. Those images were shown earlier. Some schools have police officers will inspect certain students wrongly. And you also said, Ananda also said, we wanted to make changes by helping LA Can with stopping the LAPD drone project. That's all you wrote. Is that it? Yeah. Did I leave anything out? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and Ananda, and just kind of build on what Glenda was saying, Ananda was part of a group of young folks who had interned with the coalition and really just always brought a fire and a lot of great wit and humor. So yeah, I always enjoyed having your company, Ananda. So hopefully, you know, once COVID's done, we can get back into physical space together. So yeah, thank you so much for being part of this today as well, and expressing that. And just to also build on what Glenda was saying, this photo that's up right now is actually had built on these three. So these three were from the high school, the workshop itself, and then Ananda and some of the other high school students that were working with us then met separately to evolve it and build it out even more. So this is then now reflecting, these two photographs on here are reflecting how the youth stalker state has evolved. And so we are, in a minute, we're actually going to do some small breakout groups. Hopefully folks, what we want to do is just maybe spend not a whole lot of time, maybe about 10 minutes in the groups to really look at then what do you all think are components of the youth stalker state, so you can build on what's here. And then really, because this process has been about, about building it out, right? Through meetings with with different community and young folks, and no pressure. If you're not feeling like talking, that's fine. But we wanted to go ahead and open it up. Maybe before we do that, Glenda, can you talk about the name? I don't know. I don't think you talked about how the name, we got the Yes, Let's Fight Back. Or did you?
Okay. That's
Yeah, I think that has a really great story, kind of how the name itself has evolved.
Yeah, so me and Nadia went to a conference in San Jose last summer, and I remember we were in a restaurant, and we were talking with the Network Media Justice. We were talking with them, and we were just talking about like what we were planning to do for our workshop in the conference, like the next day. And I was just explaining the programs and how like they're disguised easily. And I was just thinking like, oh, like they're not slick, like y'all ain't slick. Like I don't know why they're trying to like use this manipulative language and all that, and like try to use these community safety words and all this. So I just said like, oh, y'all ain't slick, stalker state, and it kind of just like came to mind. So I was thinking that was just a little story about the Goss Let's Fight Back.
Nice, thank you, Glenda. Yeah, I wanted to share that. Yeah, I really love how that name evolved. So hence it's now this. So yeah, if we can go ahead and give it a try. So this is basically what we want to do. Is these are the two things we want to talk about. So how do you think the stalker state operates in schools and impacts youth? And what are components you would add to or build on for the youth stalker state? So I don't know if there's anything we need to know in terms of the breakout groups, in terms of unmuting and muting. I don't know if you can explain some of that.
We could try to unmute all. There you go. So all participants have been unmuted. Can you close your screen?
Okay, I was trying to keep the questions up, ideally.
Well, I don't know how to get to, no, we can probably try to get to breakout rooms like this.
Okay. We can also, I think some folks maybe didn't like 8 folks left when I said small groups. So I don't know, maybe that people aren't feeling the small group. We can also-
Yeah, it's a small enough group right now.
We can also just talk about it as a large group right now. So, yeah, so these are basically then, so thinking of these, right, thinking of these photographs and some of the components Glenda talked about, then let's just keep it, I guess, in the big group then. What are then, and this is our original stalker state diagram, right? And so from there now we're trying to do one specifically for young folks, so, and how young folks are targeted. So, yeah, how do you think the stalker state operates in schools and impacts youth? And what are components you would add to or build on for the youth stalker state? So, so yeah, that is for anybody.
The folks have been unmuted, so if they want to unmute themselves to participate, they're welcome to do that.
I can start first, if that's fine.
Right.
Okay. So I can just answer the first question, like, how do you think the stalker state operates in schools and impacts youth? I feel like it's everything. It's the whole K through 12 system. I mean, I was in LBUSD, Long Beach Unified School District, and like I know schools get paid for attendance for each student. For students to come to school, I feel like that's weird, and schools are like responsible. They always told us like schools are responsible for us, like the moment that we step out of our house to the moment that we get back. So like I feel like that's more of a a scare tactic, like don't do anything that you're not supposed to be doing because we're responsible for you. The school is like accountable for you, even like after you leave campus.
Yeah, I know that's one thing, in talking with some of the other folks in the coalition, like looking at different programs, right? So, and how then young people really from their home to the school to wherever back home then are traced and tracked. So, so yeah, that's something So then, yeah, so then the youth stalker state is not then just about schools, right? It's also a lot larger than that. And just to kind of explain, I don't know if we got to explain this, but the stalker state, as we see here, is then looking at different components, right? The public sector, the LAPD, the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and then the fusion centers, right? So the fusion centers are essentially these mega spy centers where as information is gathered on us by various, so whether it's through schools, hospitals, police, and various sectors, then get sent into these fusion centers and then shared with thousands of agencies around the country, right? And so then this other circle we see here is the private sector, right? So there's always money to be made in violence against our communities. And so, so then how do we take that and then connect it to young people? So, so I don't know if we that's a very short background on the stalker state. But yeah, I don't know if folks have any other thoughts around this. What are components that you would add to or build on for the youth stalker state? When you think of youth being stalked, what comes to mind?
Something that stood out when you were showing those slides was the tap card and the ability to track students that way. And what made me, so I'm originally from right outside DC, and so I know a lot of some DC schools, they have like the Smart Trip card, and so it's a way to school. And I didn't even really think about the fact that, like, you know, those cards are, I'm sure, registered and they know which student is associated with it, and it's just kind of another way for them to be able to track it. So it was really eye-opening to see something like that, because as I'm a huge fan of public transportation, you know, but obviously it's like, wow, there's so many levels to this, and they allow kids to take free rides, like I think outside of school, but it's like, you know, that comes with the ability to track them, right? And to be able to see where they all are all the time. So I appreciate you guys sharing this information. It's a little terrifying, you know, how many kind of different webs and how many different ways that they can really follow youth when, like, all they're doing is trying to get to school. You know, if there aren't public, you know, school buses available, this is their only way to get there. And there's no way to kind of opt out of that if your family isn't able to afford an alternative. So it's scary, but it's one of those things that it's good to know, and just kind of shows kind of how deep this really does run.
Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me too of our data bodies fight, which really looks at then how our very existence, right? So this is within the coalition, looking at how our existence gets datafied, right? How we are reduced to these data points based on really just surviving in every element of our life, and how we're traced and tracked. And so, yeah, I know when folks were doing a lot of the work with that was one of the things was public transportation was really one of the key ways then on folks being surveilled and tracked. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
So maybe I want to throw a question as around the social network analysis and social media and the use of that, what folks think about that, because that is a pretty powerful tool that law enforcement uses very commonly to identify and you know, just monitor clusters of people through social media. LAPD even has a program where since 2012, it's called the Intelligence Gathering Guidelines, where they can take on fake identities and fake personas to go into people's social media and monitor social media as well. And there was also been like what was that, Operation Crew Cut in New York, that how statements made on social media were being held as evidence, where, you know, young people were just talking to each other and just, like, you know, saying things that young people do. So yeah, so just wanted to throw it in to see, like, what is the thought about that as a part of the stalker state. And I don't know, maybe Glenda, if you want to answer that and see what your thoughts are around social media.
I don't know, for like this, like social media, I know that, like, everyone's trying to be in touch with social media now, and everyone wants to have like a TikTok and an Instagram and a Twitter and all that. So I know for my, like, when I was in high school, like my they had a really big like social media presence, and it was just like mostly like, sorry, there's a siren going on. Okay. They had a really big social media presence, and it just mostly like, you know, activities and sports and, you know, sign this and, you know, get involved, like all that. But when there would be like incidents at the school, I remember there was one where like there was like some police officers. I don't know if it's police officers or like school security, pretty much the same thing. They're like being very violent with some with high school students, and students wanted the school to address it, but nothing was ever really done. You know, they were constantly tagging like the school's Instagram and Twitter, like, you know, address it. But nothing really came about it. So I mean, and then the Instagram pages, like they have the ability to, you know, look at students' pages if they're not on private. Pretty much like on my part. I don't know if I answered your question, but like I just wanted to share that.
No, you did. Thank you.
So I wanted to share some things we've been working on too, but I wanted to see before that, yeah, is there any more like comments, whether it's the, you know, this stalker state, the regular stalker state, the youth stalker state? Yeah, folks have any other questions or comments about it? And I think right now you can actually unmute yourself too, so feel free to just jump in.
So Andrew, go ahead, Andrew. You can unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. So first I want to say thank you so much for all your great work in this presentation. I actually had more of a question, which is, in what ways do you see the stalker state increasing in K through 12 with the pandemic, which means, I think at least two places, like as people are moving towards online education and using a lot more digital tools, it seems like there are a lot more opportunities. And then the other is, it seems like the schools are being used as an opportunity to get more involved in social services. And so that means that, you know, for instance, maybe someone's having a mental health crisis, so then there's a case that's created about them, and then that starts getting circulated. So just, you know, new ideas about the new initiatives given the situation we're going through right now. Thanks.
Yeah, Celine, do you have any comments about that? I know, like, because I know that's something you've also talked a lot about. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Celine, you're muted if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay, maybe she can't. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I guess they're not there.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else would like to respond to that as well. And I've been doing a lot of responding too, so I don't know how many other Glenda or Akil.
I don't see anybody else's hand.
The question was, like, how is the youth stalker state going to evolve, like, in terms of, like, the pandemic? Is that correctly? Okay. Dang, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say it's going to get, like, worse, but, like, technology does, like, play a factor into it, too. Like, I know a lot of teachers like to use Google Classroom and Zoom and stuff and everything. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm still trying to think about it. Like I'm like, but that's like what I'm thinking on like terms of like the technology, like teachers are gonna start requiring to use Zoom, and I don't know, because like in my university, like sometimes you're like forced to use like the lockdown browsers and everything. I don't know. I feel like that, something like that. But like I don't know, like K-12.
Hi, sorry, I was on mute for a little bit, but I was actually wondering if y'all had any thoughts about how some LAUSD schools, the ones that generally have like the funding spare for it, have been sending some of their students home with like laptops that are district owned, and have been, you know, trying to like require like class participation through that means, and like how yeah, you know, like y'all are saying, it's like because they're district owned, it's like they have access to like everything that's like on those computers, and I'm sure that there's lots of like as like access points, you know, they can distribute and control like how everything is used there in a way that's probably not how it's supposed to be intended for.
Yeah, and just kind of, I think to all three of your point, to Andrew, Glenda, and Alex, I, you know, just yeah, I feel like, you know, that the devices, I'm sure, are going to be because and then on top of that, the students will end up returning the devices. So not only, I imagine there'll be like some kind of remote, but then actually having the devices returned means that would give, you know, give the district and really whoever further access. And so it kind of just makes me think of then how with programs like preventing violent extremism, then how you know, so certain students who are seen as suspicious, well, that student always is, you know, talking shit about, you know, the government. Let's really look into what they could have been researching and everything. So so yeah, I think that is something to be said. And I think just building off of what Glenda was saying around the pandemic piece, I think both, given with the pandemic, you know, just thinking of how the state always uses health and crises to further criminalize, right? And then now with the uprisings on top of that, that have been happening, that'll really, yeah, I do imagine it would get worse. But also then, so is the fight and pushback, right, from people. So yeah.
But also maybe based upon that, going to both Andrews and the other question as well, is the extended families and the networks as well. So how that information gathering and tracing and tracking is going to be happening too. Of course, based upon making sure, and now today LAUSD announced that it's all going to be online, and some other school districts are going to be in person. So then the question would be about healthcare testing, how that would come back to impact their own families, their local communities, their local neighborhoods, and through that. And then if there are things around being positive, so how does contact tracing then come into play also already? And I know that we've done some webinars around syndromic surveillance and other forms of sentinel surveillance that is being unleashed as well. And then, of course, many times, you know, we are hearing that these apps for contact tracing are automatically being hooked up into phones, into Android and iPhones and other pieces as well. I mean, you don't know it's hooked up, but you have to physically go in and disconnect that. So I think these sort of tracing devices are very much in play, and and just as for other folks as well, historically, public health has always been one of the primary arm of the police state. You know, both on tracing and tracking, but also in designating that who is in and who's out. So it's also been a tool for punishment as well. So, you know, so it runs pretty deep. It runs pretty deep.
Right. And to add, Magali here, I think just also thinking about how the stalker state under the pandemic is just also adding a level of like visibility to folks who whose visibility may like result in added state violence. So like, for example, undocumented folk. And so even just how families receive financial support or the grants that are given to different organizations that provide that support, like nonprofits or other community organizations, and all the information that is being gathered when families of youth or just extended members are filling applications for these social programs.
Thank you. Yeah. No, thank you everyone for sharing and having this conversation. And yeah, well, definitely this is a tool we are going to be building out. And so really, I'm excited to see how this develops. I know this stalker state one right here. Oops, well, it's not. Yeah, that one has been something that's been used in many spaces to really help understand and push the fight forward and connect all of our various fights. So yeah, I'm excited to see how the youth stalker state evolves, and yeah, appreciate everyone sharing. So I'll pause there. I know that we have a few announcements before we end the meeting today. So I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Hamid.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this was pretty powerful. Thank you very much to Glenda and Nadia and Celine and Magali and Sarah and Akil for sharing. A couple quick announcements that we are also starting a teach-in series. The first one is on Surveillance 101. The first one is going to be this coming Thursday, where we are also, inviting folks to do collective reading. That is going to be by registration only. So please be on the lookout. It's already out there. It's on our website. And also like where to register. Well, the idea is to use this, opportunity while we are building online as to how do we decolonize knowledge? How do we build? How do we embody abolition? How do we share knowledge? And what is this? How deep is this national security police state? So that is one thing. And then next Tuesday is our webinar number 18. And just wanted to see what folks thought. Proposal was that, and we are trying to bring folks in to really bring in art and culture in the time of COVID and uprising in the context of the police state. So if people are going to be, Margaret, I will just post that thing in a second. Thank you so much about the Thursday webinar. So that where folks can basically the whole idea is that because art has always been the old saying that without art there's no liberation. So without culture, there's no liberation. So how is our movement artists, our cultural warriors, kind of building that power and bringing this conversation home as well? So if you are an artist, if you are an aspiring artist, and we're not looking for any Hollywood types, this is all grassroots, community based. I'm going to hit a Akil to pull out the horn and play some tunes and send on our pathway to liberation as well. So Akil, you better be ready for that. And then so I think we want to just create a space that where a lot of times we get into these very deep conversations, and we need to just sort of step away and bring back our artistic instincts, our values, our energies into the equation as well. So that's going to be the next Tuesday. So I'm going to, Nadia, in the meantime, real quickly, I'm just going to go and put the link there for registration. So if you have anything else to add to this thing before we wrap up.
No, I don't think I have anything to add. And yeah, just appreciate folks being here and appreciate how like our fight is, it's hard doing this online. I think a lot of us are just so used to the physical in person. So I think we've been forced to evolve it in a different way. So just, yeah, I appreciate us keeping the fight going, and appreciate the young folks really leading and guiding this.
So how you go about doing that, here's the information, which is both the way to register. It's on our chat room. So please go ahead and register, because you'll receive an email, and then there's also the information as to reading the People's Audit, where we'll be doing a collective learning, a collective conversation as well. So Todd, did you have a comment? Okay. So I know there's this comment from Carly, decolonizing knowledge sounds great. This was my first webinar with you all. Thank you and everyone else so very much. So yes. So any other closing comments from Glenda or Nadia? Anyone if anybody has any other comments at all? All right, cool. Well, thank you all very much, and hopefully you were able to gather the information for the webinar next Tuesday, for the teach-in this coming Thursday, and we look forward to building together. And I just got a note from Andrew that half a dozen students from their class in the spring made posters for the coalition, and they'll email it to us. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you all very much. And, yeah, and have a great evening. Have a great night. Be safe. Be healthy. Thank you. Bye-bye.